and going through the Bible by books and by chapters. Today, in our New Testament portion, we're in Ephesians chapter 3. Ephesians is one of my favorite books in the New Testament. It's just amazing how Paul weaves all these different ideas and thoughts together. And in chapter 3 today, he's going to be talking about a revelation of one of the mysteries that the New Testament talks about. There's not very many of these things that are called mysteries, that at least that are specifically listed in the New Testament. But one of those mysteries, one of these things that was hidden from mankind from the beginning of time, yet right in front of us all along, was the inclusion of the Gentiles as part of God's people. God has always loved all people. God will always love all people. There are some special covenants he had at certain times with different groups, but God has always loved everyone, and God has always cared about everyone. Well, Paul starts off in Ephesians chapter 3 by talking about how he's written about this mystery. He's just talked about it in chapter 2, and he's reminding his readers that, hey, we just talked about this stuff. And he says something that's pretty interesting. He says, when you read over what I just wrote, you can understand everything that's been showed to me. Now, he's not writing anything new. Now, some people go, well, wait a minute, it's the New Testament, right? It has to be new information. Really, it's not. It's actually really old information. In fact, if you go back to the promises that are given to Abraham, one of the promises that all the nations of the world, all the nations of the earth, will be blessed by his child. Now, we're shown in the New Testament that that spiritual child is Jesus Christ. And so all the nations of the world, all the people, have a promise of becoming God's children through this promised seed, this promised child who is Jesus. And so this isn't anything new. It's something that was in front of everyone's faces all along. They just didn't understand what God was telling them. And so what Paul does is Paul takes this revelation, this mystery that is now made plain to him, and he shares it with everybody, saying, hey, this is what God has been saying all along. You just didn't understand it. But now it's been made plain in such clear language that you have to try to misunderstand it. And that's one of the great things about this chapter. He goes through and he talks about how this gospel is for everyone. He's been made a minister of this gospel. He works hard for this gospel. He talks about how even though he was the very least of the saints, this great gift has been given to him. So again, just like with Israel, the smallest country, and God chooses them and brings them out of the greatest country. God takes somebody like Paul, who calls himself the greatest sinner and the least of the saints, and he accomplishes much with that man. At the end of this chapter, he's going to pray for spiritual strength. It's going to go through, he's going to say, for this reason I bow my knees before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth is named, that according to the riches of his glory, he may grant you to be strengthened with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may have strength to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. What an amazing prayer. What an amazing thing to pray for other people, even today, that they would be filled with the knowledge of the love of Christ, which has no height, has no depth, has no length, and no breadth, which is immeasurable. How wonderful it is to know that this great love that God has shown to the world through his Son, by sacrificing him on the cross, and even more by raising him from the dead, which gives us a hope of an eternal life in heaven, to know that that hope, that love, is something even for me. It's amazing. It's awesome. It ought to spur us on to do better each and every day. It ought to spur us on to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with everyone that we have a chance to, each and every day. It's that incredible, it's that amazing, it's the greatest news that the world will ever know, and it is the greatest privilege to be able to share that with other people. Today, that's Ephesians chapter 3.